Today, we return to one of the most defining moments in American history, the death and funerals that followed the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln and the demise of his killer, John Wilkes Booth. Let's begin at the end of the president's life. This is the last American president that I will cover who has been assassinated, at least for now. America has had four of their presidents murdered, one of them being John F. Kennedy, who I already covered, then President Garfield, who I also covered, and President McKinley, who I just recently covered. Now it's the last one, President Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater on the night of April 14th, 1865. This was in theater in Washington, D.C. There were no movies, they were just plays. So, a bullet entered behind his left ear and caused fatal damage to his brain. But the president did not die at the scene. Instead, he was carried across the street to the Peterson House, a modest boarding home. There, surrounded by cabinet members, doctors, and his grieving wife, he lingered through the night. At 7:22 a.m. the next morning, Abraham Lincoln passed away. A nation mourned. Lincoln's funeral was held on April 19th, 1865, in the East Room of the White House. It was a private ceremony attended by family, government leaders, foreign dignitaries, and Union military officers. The room was draped in black, with flowers carefully arranged around a raised platform or catafalque, which held the president's coffin. Reverend Phineas Gurley, Lincoln's family pastor, delivered the main eulogy. Clergy from multiple denominations also offered prayers and reflections, united in grief and reverence. But Lincoln's funeral did not end there. It took to the rails. He had died due to a dispute from what was going on with the Civil War, the Union versus the Confederates. On April 21st, 1865, a special train left Washington, D.C. The route retraced Lincoln's 1861 journey to the capital, a symbolic return to the people he had served. The train traveled over 1,600 miles in 13 days, stopping in cities like Philadelphia, New York, Columbus, Ohio, and Chicago. Back when Columbus did have a train station, at each stop, thousands lined in the streets. Many waited hours for a brief moment beside the open casket. America was mourning, especially those watching the train pass by in New York City. Raw, real, and national. Finally, on May 4th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was laid to rest at the Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois, his hometown and now his eternal resting place. While the nation buried its fallen president, a massive manhunt was underway for the man who shot him. John Wilkes Booth, who was an actor in that theater, spent 12 days on the run, hiding with the help of Confederate sympathizers, those supporting slavery. But on April 26, 1865, their enemies, Union troops, cornered him in a tobacco barn on the Garnett Farm near Port Royal, Virginia. Booth refused to surrender. The soldiers lit the barn on fire to force him out. In confusion, Sergeant Boston Corbett fired a shot against others. These orders led to those bullets striking only Booth, no one else. He was struck in the neck. Booth was dragged from the burning barn, paralyzed. He died a few hours later, still at the scene, whispering his final words, "Useless, useless," as he looked at his lifeless hands. Booth's body was transported back to Washington, D.C., where an autopsy was conducted aboard the USS Montauk, a Navy ironclad docked at the Navy Yard. What happened next was shrouded in secrecy. Rather than giving the assassin a public burial, the government quietly buried Booth's remains in the basement of the old penitentiary at the Washington Arsenal, now part of Fort McNair, a tourist attraction. There was no public funeral, only a handful of officials present. Thank you for listening to this episode of Strawberry Ink. Till next time, take care, stay safe, and may those affected rest in peace.